Let's launch a probe into it.
Should destroy the probe. Phasers are armed and ready.
So are the probes. Welcome to Class L Probe, while my scanner gently beeps, where we do deep dives on topics from Debate 9. Yeah, did I say that right? Yep, while my scanner gently beeps. That's what I called it. Yes. We are where we do deep dives on topics from Debate 9 and, try to come to some sort of consensus rather than just fight it out like we do on that show. More federation-y in its approach, Indeed. Really. We like science in probes.
Indeed. So we're your hosts. I'm Dave.
Yep, and I'm Davan.
We are
Captain Maeric.
Tailors, and we have with us Captain Maeric.
Nice
so
to meet you guys.
We're gonna call Adam for tonight.
Oh no, Adam of the Delta ship.
That's right.
No. Adam couldn't join us, but we have Maeric in to replace Adam tonight and bring a topic to talk about.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, Maeric.
Of course, glad to be here. Love this stuff.
All right, well, let's get right into some probes, shall we? Adam always likes to save the heavy one for last, so even though he's not here, I think we could do that.
Oh, what's the heavy one? I don't even know. Which one is it?
I really like all the topics.
I was gonna say the same thing. I thought all of them were good choices. These are good topics.
They are. I'm gonna say
we've really developed.
We'll save that one for the end.
The other day it was. It's impressive how many of these topics we've managed to generate in a short time.
Dave, getting that list is an impressive thing. That's a big list. I tried to copy it into Discord to show my friend, and Discord's like, too many lines. You can't do that.
No, thank you.
Choice.
Oh yeah, here at Locutors of Trek, formats with text limits don't really work well for us.
Yes, I see.
Yeah, we go on a bit.
We do tend to go on a bit.
Like you need at least 1,200 characters just to get the context, and then whatever comes after that. But
listen, I'm going to fit right in here. Trust me. This
good.
Is perfect place.
Good. Oh, good. We're getting good luck wishes for our probes. Well, that's good because sometimes they do explode.
Thank you, Azure Rogue.
But that's worse. He's just standing by with those phasers.
That's my co-host, by the way, from the night shift.
Oh, right on. Welcome. Live long and
Shouldn't you be running the night shift? Who's running the night shift right now?
Is it night time?
You guys are both
about time.
Oh my god! All right. Well, let's get into yours then, Maeric. Why don't we say you said you had something maybe to elaborate on this a little more? I believe.
I certainly do. Do you want to run it out the line?
No, you can do that, but I'll launch us a probe first. All right. Let's go.
Oh, that was good. That was a good probe sound. Okay, so the topic was a man convinced of his own death is sure to find it. Captain Pike is unfit for command. Now, I could feel the hackles going up everywhere as I say this because people love Captain Pike, including me.
I love Captain Pike.
Exactly. I want to elaborate.
Not just because he's so damned handsome. He's also a great captain. And
you saw my graphic, right? I'm in love with the hair.
Yeah,
the hair is
some pretty great hair. Yeah,
so dreamy. Man, that's dream.
As a guy who
at the same time,
I'm just saying.
Despite all that love, this is still a good question.
It is indeed. Yes. In fact, the bigger question is there hair under that bandana as well? I've never seen a glimpse under the bandana.
There's lots of hair.
Look at that.
It's brutally luscious locks, I gotta say.
Look, it's gorgeous. He's got enough for all three of us.
So what's your particular take on this?
Okay. I love this discussion because it's been coming up a bunch in our own circles in the night shift. We have a podcast topic coming up pretty soon, which is basically, I'm titling it, "Oh Captain, My Captain." And it's basically the captain's, overarching effect, like their leadership style and the trickle-down effect that has throughout the entire crew dynamic, basically. You can kind of look at a captain and their first officer as sort of like a duo that plays off of each other. They sort of juxtapose. And I've said in the past that when talking about my favorite captain, which is one of the most common questions you ever get asked as a Star Trek fan, my answer was so simple until season 1 of Strange New Worlds, because then it got very complicated. I used to say it's an easy call for Captain Picard.
Cisco.
No, it's Captain Picard for me. DS9 is my favorite show, but Captain Picard, classic Picard, is my favorite. But
Maeric,
when Picard,
man after my own cloth, right there.
Let's go, buddy. That's, in my opinion, he's the best paragon of Starfleet that there could ever be, until it got complicated, because Strange New Worlds brought out Captain Pike, which I adored, and all of a sudden I saw a radically different captaining style that was also really working and was really awesome. And at the same time,
yeah, he cooks
Captain
and he's
Picard,
friendly,
dude. Yeah, but it's a collab. That's
so not
right?
Picard.
No, not at all Picard. It's a collaborative leadership experience, right? He sort of like encourages other people to do what they would want to do. But at the same time, the Strange New Worlds was coming up and giving me another option for awesome favorite captain. Picard seasons 1 and 2, which this is our first time talking, but not my favorite experience or iteration of Captain Picard. And so the
season 3 is glorious.
Well, season 3 was glorious, and thank God for it, right? Frakes, high five, buddy. But when at the same time the Strange New Worlds was bringing Pike up, Picard as a character was being tarnished for me. So it made it really kind of like this confusing thing. But here's where it gets really complicated. Season 2 speaks directly to this question, because it's been coming up a lot. The character is framed initially in Discovery, finding out about his future, knowing about his death, and the show tends to elaborate that as his lack of confidence. He says at some point, and he knows it's a lack of confidence, he says, "I saw my own death, Spock, at least the death of the man I am now. I know exactly how and when my life ends. I can't stop seeing it. How will it live in me? Will it make me hesitant, cautious, not cautious enough? I'm already second guessing myself, and that's the last thing a captain can afford." And what do we see in season 2? He is like, in my opinion, time after time now, he's sort of losing the reins over his crew. So there
probably
are
because
times
he's
where,
mostly not there in season 2.
But then he comes in
like 3
just
episodes.
to be wishy-washy, you know, like it's not.
It's
he
true.
lets Uhura make the judgment call, and like that big thing when she was getting hallucinations might have been the right call, but not the way I would want my captain to handle that entire episode. It just felt like he let go of this whole leadership thing. We've seen the murder that took place on the Enterprise in season 2. Like he's sort of losing track of that. Even in the redo of the Romulan episode in from TOS, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Balance of Terror. That entire
Yes.
exercise was an exercise in his indecisiveness and his lack of ability to commit to something.
That one didn't make him look great.
No, it didn't. So in my opinion, it's not on a good track. I do love him. I think he is fit for command provisionally, because I want him to get better, but it's not looking good for season 2. So that's my big full picture.
Yeah.
Well, and you said it there in his own quote about himself. The one thing I think about, if you know, it's not about knowing you're gonna die. It's about knowing that you're definitely gonna live until then. So it's like, does that knowledge make you more reckless, less reckless, or the same? And I would say probably more reckless, at least for yourself. Like if you have this crazy away mission, normally maybe you'd take this certain team with you that would help you accomplish it better. But maybe you just know you're going to live until this other moment that's horrible. So why not just go do it yourself? You know?
It's like Time Zero or something, when they don't want to bring Data on the away mission because they know he's going to die at some point, and he's like, no, it's when you have that foreknowledge in your head, you start making very different decisions, even about away missions and the like. Right?
Data finds it comforting, unlike Pike. It wants him. Data's is like, I find it comforting.
I'm more human now.
Yeah.
I mean, it brings. I just recently rewatched the DS9 pilot, so it brings back that question of linearity.
Yeah.
In a challenging fashion, right? If you know what the next big stop on the line is, how do you actually end up relating to that, right? Like there's a wonderful passage in St. Augustine's Confessions from 1700 years ago, where he talks about the fact that one of the most interesting things about human life is that we're a consciousness tending toward not being. right? That we're always possessed with the awareness of the contingency and tenuousness of our being. So there's some urge that he and much of the rest of the philosophical tradition would call conatus, which is this desire to exist and continue existing, right? And so Pike's like got his temporarily bound up, right? Because he knows, just as you quoted so beautifully, that he's going to end, but he's also going to continue on in some sort of unpike life.
The death of the man I am now. Yeah.
And that to me is the deep horror of the thing, right? That maybe if he were to find a glorious death in that moment, he could say, okay, how do I bravely live toward that? But what he's looking forward to is being trapped in a certain way that we see really painfully laid out in the original series.
Yes, we do. Twice.
Pair of episodes. Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the pilot episode of DS9, one of my favorite episodes ever, and certainly one of the greatest pilots ever. Oh, yeah. But I just love that exploration of the concept of linear time. And one of my favorite lines ever is what I think it's Jake as the baseball player in the Fever Dream. He says, you value your ignorance of what is to come. And it's just like this. We really do. I mean, we truly do. And I don't think that we're ever really cognizant of that fact until we bring it up in something like this. Oh. And it's so cool to have Pike sort of experiment with this, because we saw him have terrible doubt, want to avoid it, but know that it's, it's an altruistic, it's a heroic thing that he's going to die for.
Ultimately, yeah.
And then even though that's the case, and he's the hero who would definitely do it, he does in fact try to cheat it. And when he does, the galaxy falls apart. I mean, that's the terror.
Weirdly, the seeds of that are laid really early in the series, right? Like there's a very early episode, I think episode 2 or 3 of season 1, maybe, where he is beginning to search for the kids who are going to be those officers.
He learns the names, which is terrible.
What an insane breach of every possible privacy boundary.
Absolutely, 100%.
Not to mention, make it harder on yourself. Why don't you personalize it as much as possible? It's like,
indeed.
Yeah, I mean the seeds of that instability and that sort of obsessional quality are. There's actually a guy, a psychologist, whose name I forget. He came up with this notion called theological worlds, which is sort of like the general cast of your sense of what your existence is like. And there's different ways to philosophical worlds, whatever you want to call it, but. He has these pairs of things that he calls obsessio and epiphania, right? Epiphania is the sort of revelation about who I am. And obsessio is the continuous problem that shows up independent of how much I evolve, right? It just kind of comes back in a new form. Because it's the thematic of my life, the shadow side of who I am. And I feel like Pike is really caught in that, where I think he's had that epiphany. And it drives... an instability in his personality that otherwise might not actually be there. Otherwise, he'd just be kind of like, let's do this shit. Like he'd be very
hit it.
Right? Yeah. That's what I lost.
Or punch it, depending on what universe you're in.
Yeah. I like
Tarantino guy might say the other side, but
Yeah. So unfit for command. I mean, that's a tough thing to say, like that's a hard line to take. Is like the thing? It's like, yes, he's definitely struggling, and maybe they should assign him a direct counselor.
Well, that's a big part of this, because it's all classified. Everything that happened in Disco is classified, and his knowledge of this can't really be discussed. He gets no help from anybody except for the 2 people I think he discusses this with, Una and somebody.
Spock, wasn't it?
Spock. Yeah, that's the conversation.
Spock's not a lot of help in these situations.
In his Spockiest best, he offers as much as he can give, and it's pretty good for Spock, right? But I mean, this is real existential dread here, man. Not like even like in a philosophical way, like in a very tangible, real way. He needs real help. He absolutely does. And I'm with you, Davan. I'm reticent to say he's unfit for command. That's why I gave the caveat when I picked the topic. What
Mhm.
I'm more likely to say is that he is certainly not in his best self to command. Like there's a better version of himself out there where he's not burdened by this uncertainty. And we've seen it fluctuate throughout the show. And I just think dramatically between season 1 and season 2, it is on the downward slope. It's not improving. If you go back, speaking of good pilots, man, I recently just went back and watched Strange New Worlds season 1, episode 1. Oh my God, that is Star Trek in a nutshell. That is like the greatest experience of Star Trek in a bubble. And I just adored it. He is the perfect captain in that episode. In fact, not even in just that episode, the episode where he is sort of being or he's dealing with that species that just mirrors what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Oh,
great episode.
Is that not the greatest Star Trek? If you wanted to describe what Star Trek is, it's just it's wonderful. That's wonderful. He has it in him.
Strange New Worlds is killing it for sure. They're killing it.
Yeah,
it's a great show.
But yeah, I think you're right. He may not be his best fit right now, but he's not exactly unfit.
Indeed.
So, well, let me add this to it then. Is that the kind of person that you want in command of the flagship? Is he unfit for the Enterprise?
Well, can we
is
use
that the guy you want making the biggest
example?
of the big decisions? That doesn't make him look great, does it?
It does not, because that was a very big deal, right? This is not just like Strange New World episode, whatever. It's not just Planet of the Week or Problem of the Day. It is
Kirk had to pull his ass out of the fire.
Exactly. And if you didn't, the entire galaxy collapses. This was literally the great big moment that they needed to send the flagship for. And it was his uncertainty and his lack of ability to really dedicate to like an authoritative stance that caused some big problems. And now he was bailed out by sort of wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff, and also himself from the future, and also Kirk. But like if one of those things didn't hold up, if one of those tentpole legs weren't there, galaxy destroyed. So I mean, it's hard to not acknowledge that there's some question about that there.
Yeah, it's just sort of a tough one.
I had to throw out the reference because we just got the trailer for the new Doctor Who return. So
yeah.
All right, Maeric, it's your question, so I'm going to come to you first. You answer the question: Is Captain Pike unfit for command?
Okay, I'm gonna say he's not unfit for command. If I were Starfleet, Admiralty, and I was aware of what was going on, I would not remove him from command, but I would be watching him for sure. And I would probably instill some kind of actual counselor on that ship to try to, I don't know, work with him, keep tabs on it. It would definitely be a cause for concern. Would I pull him from his station, you're unfit for command, and retire him? No, but I do have concern.
Yeah, that's well put. When you put it that way, like, yeah, if I was in the Admiralty too, it's like that's at least not step one. Like you try a lot of things before you yank him out of the chair.
Yeah. Because he is awesome. He does many good things. He's
the hair. The hair's going to get him out of a lot of the situations alone.
And even if I pulled him from the Enterprise, can we leave the hair and just pull?
We put it on Picard.
My wife knows I'm literally trying to grow my Pike hair. It's not as easy for me as it is for him.
Oh, man. I mean,
what say you, Dave?
It does point to is a society that thinks itself past the kinds of issues that would require a counselor, right? And that, like, they've hit an interesting moment in Strange New Worlds because they're fantastically technologically advanced. And you can see it in characters like their characterization of Nurse Chapel, right? Who is totally enthralled with like basically living in the future. And they know they live in the future. I'm like, this is so damn awesome. Let's go to warp speed. Woot! But one of the things that I think they feel like, having gotten rid of abject poverty, having gotten rid of a whole lot of disease, having done all these sorts of things, they feel themselves to be past a lot of those kind of issues that earlier iterations of human culture and human beings would have suffered from. And so they just don't necessarily provide the kinds of ready age that you see them providing by the time we hit TNG. You know.
So you think this is a dip in the ego of us feeling like we're well beyond that problem, and then the awareness that we're not, and then the implementation of counselors on ships?
Exactly. I mean, I think there's a way in which you could chart
That makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Because if you're, on Enterprise, it's clear that they're not going to necessarily send a counselor because they're more on a spacecraft that's held together by rivets. Here they're even beyond that.
Oh, Azure, good point. And also someone who desperately needs a counselor.
Yeah,
in fact, I'm glad that you brought that up because it might be talked about later on this podcast. What were the odds of that?
Too fit for command.
And I gotta say, Azure, if you like St. Augustine's Confession references and stuff like that, you're in the right place.
Yeah, there may be a couple such things.
So we agree. Don't yank him from the chair.
No, I think he's got a few weeks more anyway.
Indeed.
But I like that the idea that stuff like this is going to lead to counselors on ships because they're just going to run into a lot of problems like Ben Maxwell and stuff like that. Clearly Ben Maxwell should have had a counselor attached to his hip.
Well, and it's true they may just be running into stuff they've never run into before, so they don't really know how to treat it.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Here's my response to that, because we don't have to go towards TNG for Ben Maxwell for real trauma that is identifiable and should be diagnosed and treated on a regular basis. We can stay in Strange New Worlds. We had people with war-torn PTSD murder someone on the Enterprise.
Mbenga.
These people need real counseling right now. They just got out of a war.
My favorite character on the show now, and I love Christopher Pike, but man, do I love Mbenga. He is a great character.
He's there's an entire podcast that could be done about that episode. There's no doubt about that.
It's my favorite episode of the series. I love that episode.
Is it really? Wow. I thought it was a really good episode. There were many things about that episode I really liked, but there's so many good ones. I don't know where to put my favorite.
It's like an O'Brien's Must Suffer episode. It's like when, and we're going to talk about an episode like that on this show tonight. When Star Trek gets really dirty like that sometimes, somehow it just ends up being some of the best Trek for me, because that's when they're going all in on some of these explorations, and they're just like, we'll just see how dirty it will get. And
sometimes they don't reach an ethically clean solution, and
they don't in this episode.
I would say less in this episode than most of the other examples we could give. But I'm with you, Dave. I made a comment about this recently, and I feel very strongly about it. I love when an episode deals with really serious things, shows a moral quandary of some kind, has characters throughout the series and throughout the show that you respect and love, represent different perspectives all over this complicated issue, and then the show ends. And it's not telling you how to feel about it. It's just giving you all the options, representing the points of view, and then leaving you to have a darn good conversation with your friends or family or whatever about it afterwards. Because that's that's my favorite stuff. I love that.
That's a good segue. We'll move on to my question then. All right. So this is from the episode Deep Space Nine, Hard Time, an O'Brien Must Suffer episode. As you'll know,
man, to a string of hair right there.
Yeah, it's Billy Connolly. They couldn't get Colmeany that day. They just got Billy Connolly. But yeah, so he has a digital imprisonment, so they can get his sentence over with in it's only a few minutes. It's crazy how quick it is. But it feels like 20 years to him. And he has this buddy, his roommate, and Ichar, and he ends up killing Ichar, and then he gets out of this digital imprisonment, and he's just expected to walk back into his life because Starfleet. But it doesn't go so well, and we end up with this very serious scene at the end. This episode kills me, man. I love this episode, and it's tough. It's a tough thing to watch. It makes me cry every time.
Well, the
It's
scene
so
with
good.
Molly breaks my heart every time.
Me,
Man.
oh my god, me too.
Yeah, that's hard.
That scene followed by this scene, and then when Julian comes in and talks to him and tells him how he is a good man, and they just took that away for a little while, but that's still like, oh my god, it makes me cry every time.
Yep.
It's a fantastic episode. But that
That's another
brings
chapter
us
in their bromance that I love so much. It's just such a good relationship between the two of them.
What a beautiful depiction of just the power of like empathy. You
Oh,
don't have to
like-
know what he's going through, but you're like, I see your pain, and I can find my way into that with you and meet you
from two men, grown men in the 90s, which was, that was just like
Right?
a really good representation of like a healthy male relationship, which isn't always, an easily attainable thing. I have so many friends who, myself included, I say all the time, like, that's the friendship I've wanted my whole life. And it's just it's a tough thing to find, but their relationship is beautifully explored in some episodes like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
like Dave and I.
And to your credit, actually, Davan, or to the point that you said that like it's Starfleet, so they just kind of shoved it back in. I think they tried to stop him, didn't they? Didn't he was like, I want to work. I don't want counseling. Let me go back to.
Oh yeah, no.
Well, yeah, he was
really
started
doesn't
skipping his
understand what
sessions
to do.
and things like that. He
Yeah.
was supposed to, for sure. Yeah, and it's tough to watch, but not just because of the subject matter of the episode, but because it's O'Brien. Like of all the characters they could have done that to, it was the right choice because he's just like seems like the most competent in like kind of water off a duck's back of them all. In a way, he had been a soldier, and he doesn't seem to let that.
I remember they
affect him
keep
too much.
calling him a hero, and there's that young
Setlick.
engineering officer.
The hero of Setlick 3.
That episode, yeah.
Oh yeah, he was like, I'm not a hero.
Boy
But anyway, that was
Oh.
a long-winded intro, perhaps, but that
Start
leads us
singing for
to
Stompy there.
Yeah, man. It's a good song.
Stompy.
That's a great
Oh.
episode in general, actually. That entire
Good lad.
episode.
Yes.
Good lad.
Yep.
The Federation should adopt something similar to the Argrathi model of digital corrections. So, Dave, I'm going to throw to you first on this.
See,
This was the one you came up with. This was a
it
question
is,
you
yeah.
came up
And
with.
so why I phrased it as something similar to is that there's an episode of Voyager where Janeway talks about the fact that early star flights, sans warp, or early low warp flights used VR rigs to keep the astronauts' minds spry while they were traveling through deep space. And so their bodies would deteriorate. So the Federation obviously has this technology already. They just don't use it very much. They prefer holodecks and whatever, photons and stuff. But in terms of corrections, it seems to me it would be both a humane and efficient way to perform corrections and let people get back to their best ideal contributing life as quickly as possible, right? Because the Federation model, we've seen Federation prisons, right? The Federation model of this digital corrections
They're
is
cushy.
identical to the Argrathi model. Right? They're not going to stick you in a sandy box with HR.
They're no
going
Rurapente,
to-
I'll tell you that.
right? They're going to sit you with like the doctor from Voyager for endless sessions, or that lovely Birdman from Lower Deck,
Miglimo.
or right,
Miglimo.
who's so great, or Deanna Troy, or somebody, right? They're going to sit you with a counselor, and it's basically going to be like digital Norwegian corrections, right? Till you basically accepted what's gone on, and you can kind of work through a way to integrate yourself back into society. But if it took 20 minutes, it'd be wonderful, right? People could, I mean, the real trouble would be if there's still a lasting sense that for particularly egregious crimes, people should be spending a certain point of their life outside of human society, right? Like a real time instead of a digital time. But yeah.
So You think that's just that's part of the whole thing is you have to spend real time. That's part of the punishment. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that certainly seems to be part of how our sense of corrections has developed. So there might be residual sentiment that needs to be part of it, right?
Because I was gonna say, like, what if, like, even if it is cushy, it's Starfleet, like, penal colonies. What if you could even speed that up? What if Tom Paris just could have been spent 5 minutes in a chair and then have been rehabilitated? You know,
But
like,
that's part of the issue, right? So like we have to balance the pros and the cons of that. And the one pro that you readily identified, which is the biggest pro, is the lack of time that it would take and resources. We don't need a penal colony. We don't need guards. We don't need counselors. We don't need time wasted to do this. But part of the benefit of that is the really scary part, which is that it can't be real-time augmented in any way, shape, or form. That means that whatever you decide to go in with, now it may not be programmed to be as heinous as it was in the DS9 episode. It could be something cushy, but like Davan said, it could be 5 minutes that Tom Paris was better. It could be however much longer. You can't check in with them to do that. So my real question is it the environment in which they are placed in and the duration for which they are there that is programmed, or in their response to it is individual, or is their response to it also programmed? Did he get written in that he would have that trauma? Did he all of his mental breaks and problems with that?
Like no matter who it was, they would kill each other.
Right. So his experience would have been had the exact same way.
I've had that thought too.
That's a great.
It just seems so out of
but it's a really important factor.
Because O'Brien certainly seems convinced that it was something in him, in the situation, in the pressure that caused.
And we, as the audience, knowing O'Brien, agree. Like that's sellable to us. We understand him well enough to know he's capable of that.
Corrections just does this to you. You're right.
Right. Yeah. And wasn't there an issue about him being human? Like they didn't really know he didn't have the same.
Yes. And they said it took a little while longer because, or something.
So there were complications.
Yeah.
So you could say it's, we'll have it tailored to a very specific set of time. And we don't know that that's true, but if we could tailor their response to it, then sure. But then why would they have it be 25 years? Why would it take 25 years? What's the duration? If we could tailor your response to it, why don't we just go in and then make you have an epiphany that takes 2 seconds, even in your memories, 2 seconds, that somehow changes your entire frame of mind? Mm-hmm. There's got to be a limitation here in some way, shape, or form. And the other part of that is the duration. He was 25 years removed from his wife and child. There's no getting to see your family. There's no watching your kids
humans
grow, right? I mean, like that's a big part of this, because he gets back, and I was thinking to myself, like 25 years ago, like it doesn't matter how significant of a relationship you had with somebody that long ago. They're strangers to you now, like absolute strangers to you now. There's almost no way to make that okay.
Like, what a profound alienation, right? And
indeed.
That. Oh man, it's such a good point, because the issue ultimately becomes that there is some need for real time to pass, either in the digital environment, it's simulated like a 25-year stretch, or in real space time, you've got to do a 20-year stretch or 25-year stretch or something.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about the time passing that seems to be the assumption, right? There's something purgative or transformative about the time passing.
They can't just give you the end effect.
It plays out for O'Brien.
Like whatever your brain,
in a wholly brutal way. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Like whatever your brain chemistry would be at the end of that 25 years simulated, they can't just like give you that end point,
without
that end
time,
goal. They have to give you the simulated time. Yeah, you have to have that. Yeah.
They also went into detail about how they can't undo. There's no control Z on this. Once it happens to you, you're stuck, man. They can't augment it or remove it and be like, oh, that didn't work. Let's try it a different way. Like this was just, he was stuck with the trauma forever, or at least until the beginning of the next episode. But
well, here's my question. Since it says something similar to the Argrathi model of digital corrections, could you not just do simulated 400 sessions with Deanna Troi?
That's what I'm thinking, right? That would be the Federation version.
I suppose so.
Like you'd end up doing, it would basically be an answer to our current mental health crises. Everybody, you have a Deanna Troy. You
Yeah,
get a Deanna Troy. Everybody gets
I
a
wouldn't
Deanna
mind
Troy.
a Deanna Troy.
Look under your
But, like-
chair. It's a Deanna Troy.
Doesn't that seem like something the Federation would do? Like, I don't know, maybe not because it's
They've
a
already
bit,
got the
maybe
EMH.
Well,
It
I would
makes
say
sense.
that
I can see it making sense.
yeah,
If-
and it would make sense if they planned it out, right? So like what I have a counseling background and I can everything in my brain goes, you can't just skip to the end. But if you
Yeah.
tailor made epiphanies and breakthroughs, you know, just painstakingly structured in a way that they knew was something that would handle most traumas and most rehabilitation processes for however many different kinds of people. If they had a generic kind of thing, and if it was better managed, tailored to humanity, or maybe have the ability to undo it or tweak it in the after effect. If some of these questions are answered yes, I think it is a better way. I think there would be a better way. It would be a nice answer to our current prison crisis.
Like, it would
too.
save people their lifetime, right?
Yeah,
And in that
yeah,
sense, you're saving them the most precious
Mhm.
resource they have.
indeed.
Because, I mean, that's our
And you-
current trade-off for jail, right? Like, you lose a segment of your lifetime to this place and this time and this set of activities,
Mhm.
which is one of the ways we've structured things since. Well, I mean, prisons changed what it means, right? Into modernity. It used to be a debt thing, but now it's a different kind of a thing, often enough. Well, that
Still
still plays a
awful.
huge role. Let's be honest.
But it's like you said, you don't have to skip to the end because you can simulate all that time. So it's like it's not even skipping to the end. You could actually
Well,
have them feel like they've had 400 counseling sessions.
Why not even
What-
break that up? Why not have them wake up every 5 minutes and be like, that was 6 months, sort of check in, 6 more months. Like, it doesn't have to be
Sure.
like 20 years all at once. You could tailor things based on,
Like a parole
progress.
type system, right?
Exactly. So it would
Yeah.
still maybe take you a week in a clinic instead of, 5 minutes or whatever, but it would save you 20 years.
Yeah. And you have real people there waiting for you to wake up. And
I
Oh, that's coming
died
from
laughing when I read that
completely
earlier.
You
I
just
tried not
go-
to interrupt your point, Dave, but I started just cracking up. It's
Yeah.
so good.
This show is the
It is
perfect
true.
evolution of beard growth, but that
Oh,
makes
man.
me the most evolved of all of us.
It
So
does
I'll
indeed.
take it.
Mm, I got ways
Unless
to
it
go.
means over time, in which case we've started short, gone long, and then gone gray and medium length.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Or it started like me in caveman times, and then people learned how to do razors and
that's
things.
true.
and
We're
ended
the
up like
evolution
Maeric.
of
So,
humanity.
yeah, it could go any way. Like
Just like,
that's
how
a class
many
L
did that
probe we might have to
become? How
launch.
quickly? We've now just descended into arguing. How would you set up this graph? If you plotted this
We are
graph,
hilarious. The beard podcast. It's sad. I can't even grow a beard. That's the really sad part of it. If I grew out
Wow.
everything, it's a perfect goatee and nothing on the side.
Damon asked, at one point, would the simulation of counseling determine the person is beyond fixing and should be terminated? Well, I don't know about the should be terminated thing. That doesn't sound very
That's never resulted.
federation.
I've never
But like,
heard a counseling session.
You're beyond
That would-
help. That's it.
No,
Phaser on
enough for
kill.
you.
but you
Two
could,
have to
you
prove
know,
that to me.
imagine a scenario where they fire, corrections, whatever amount of time into somebody, or like 400 counseling sessions with a betazoid, and have little effect potentially. Like, but
Can you give
then
me
what
an
do you do?
example of somebody in Star Trek where you think that they are beyond help? My brain immediately went to Suitor, and even
Yes.
he,
But he
by the
was-
time
he was fixed.
going, was getting totally fixed. I was really
Yeah.
rooting for that guy. So
I
if
mean,
Suitor, the
yes,
mass
Gul
murderer-
Dukat. Gul Dukat is beyond help.
Ducat's a lovely example
Oh
Mhm.
God,
because he's
Yeah.
like literally, he's just so like
he's the greatest villain Star Trek has ever seen, in my
If
opinion.
anyone needs to be put down like a
Literally
rabid
a
dog,
black
it's Gul
hole.
Dukat. But
Yeah, he plays the most nuanced and interesting, realistic villain.
It's
that I
amazing.
think we've ever seen in Star Trek. He just the level of ego portrayed by Mark
man,
Limo.
it's so happily
It's
self-
believable. It's believable, like egotism. It's the kind of thing that these people have existed, and it was really faithfully
Yes.
portrayed in that show. It's just shocking. It's
And the interesting thing is to read that back into what Ducat must have experienced. Like, think about reading A Stitch in Time, right?
Yeah,
I
he
just
gets the
started it.
Thinking
backstory
about
on it.
the
I'm an
Cardassian
hour
on
into
which
it.
they grew up, and
Mhm.
Ducat's experiences of like privation, superiority, inferiority, guilt, feel like all that stuff, what it creates in that guy, because he
Mhm.
wants his people to be better than whatever his experience of himself was.
Oh, and
At
that's the
some
most
early
compelling part of
age,
the entire character. He
yeah,
thinks he's altruistic. He thinks he's doing good, and he thinks he's helping. Even the Bajorans, he thinks he's helping. He's really got
yes.
this twisted ego thing going on in like the most believable way. The writers were incredible with that
But
character.
it's like Ducat is a long form meditation on who's it, Gul Madred in Chain of Command.
Mm.
When he
It's
talks about that
the
little
boy
boy
in the
in
street.
Market, and Picard says, "Now I feel sorry for you." Like it's like
Yeah.
that moment gets so painfully extended with Ducat.
Which also brings a level of sort of like consistency through their species experience, like through the way their culture is. Like we know it, we believe it, we see it from multiple angles, and that those are really connected. Like you said, I think that they make them both more believable, which is really compelling.
For sure.
All right. Well, so how do we wrap this one up then? I mean, we'd agree it would just be if they did adopt a model like this, it would just be you'd be sitting on a beach talking to Deanna Troy a lot.
Or something, yeah, appropriate to your personality type, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Speaking
Like
to the
dwarf
need to
would not
tailor
do
it in the
well
first
sitting
place.
on a beach.
N-
But I think your point is right. Like they'd find some appropriate treatment method, right? It would be about that.
That's the answer to it, right? Like we would say yes, it is a good thing. The answer to the question is yes, if there has to be
Yeah.
these several things that are.
But
that
we can
don't
accept
know.
the if.
We can accept the if, and
Do
under
you,
the
do you
under
think they
the
would do
umbrella,
these compressed time implants in people?
if it was safe, tailored, and ethical, I think they would and should. I think even in
To give
the
people their
21st
lives, I guess.
century, there's still a limit. We still have a finite existence. We watch these characters grow. Star Trek is old enough. We know. So
Mhm.
it's as valuable to them then as it is to us now. So I think it's still really valid.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. I wasn't sure I was going to come out on that end. That was a good discussion, fellas.
It was.
All right. So let's move on to the next one.
All right.
We have.
I think this is
one,
me,
two-
isn't it?
we fire away here.
Odo
yeah,
is
this is
the
a big
best
one.
example of an outsider's character in Star Trek.
Well, sir, this one I could start because I had to debate this in Debate 9. And I had to debate against him, I believe.
Against
Was
who?
it? Or was I the judge? Against Odo. No, because I had to.
This was.
I think I had to go for Data, and I convinced myself. I believe. I think it's not Odo because when you come down, like with Data, if we're going to use him as a counterpoint, can never be a life form, a biological life form. Like Odo, when we see him later on.
Wait, Picard season 3.
Yeah. Oh, what?
About Data being a biological life form.
Oh, okay. Well, crap. You got me there.
Sorry. I shouldn't have said it.
Well played.
Have a laugh. Have a laugh. All right. But
that's good.
Like the thing Data would say about not knowing if he would ever die. I mean, I guess like, the thing about Odo, I guess, where you could make a case for it, is he doesn't know anything about his people or himself really either. So like Data knows, at least he thinks he does, what the parameters or expectations of a synthetic life form are. But like Odo doesn't really know how to kind of frame himself almost. But I don't know does that make you more of an outsider character? Because he can become that, as we see like a shot of Odo later where he's very like can do faces then and he's just acts like a regular human. Like, can Data ever get to that point?
But wait, we have to decide on the criteria for this discussion. What is the frame of reference for which we are judging this on? Is it that he's
The outsider
best
character?
Well, so I've had this discussion myriad times
So it
because
makes
I
an
recognized
outsider
this early, loved it as like a facet of Star Trek. I always call them the mirrors because they reflect on humanity. They're meant to be there to reflect on humanity. And each one does it very differently, but the goal is always to reflect humanity so that we see how far humanity has come, the strengths and weaknesses of us as a people. If we're judging by that, that is a very different criteria by how far removed from humanity are there. Because what you said a moment ago was that Odo is, and this is completely true. That is an easy discussion. He's removed not just from being human, he's removed from being a solid
Humanoid.
humanoid. Like
monoform.
he's a monoform. He is completely removed. So he has the farthest perspective away to look. But if we're judging by like how effective or profound that mirror experience is, or facet of the show is, I would argue that he is not the best of those. So it depends on what the criteria is. I just don't know what it is.
What's your criteria, Dave?
I think let's say, taking your criteria for the sake of argument, who would you argue is the best? Because I think
the four that we've seen, right? I think we can probably agree the four big outsider characters have been Spock, Data, Odo, and the Doctor. Maybe 7 of 9.
I was going to say it's a dance between the Doctor and 7 of 9. In fact, I feel like they work together to represent that in the show.
So of those, who do you think is the outsider?
Well, they're all the outsider. They all do it in such wonderful ways because Spock is probably my favorite version of this because it evolves the most. When you start off TOS, he's the only representative of a non-human, which is profound as heck right away. In the very beginning of Star Trek, he's the only alien. And not only that, but we see like hilarious, albeit hilarious, blatant bigotry from like people against him. Like, you green-blooded hobgoblin. Like, there's this stuff, he's not human. And he is limited because of this. He's very strong, he's very smart, but we enjoy sort of taking him down. We see his limitations. People are beating him in chess. They probably shouldn't beat him in chess. We celebrate our humanity through him. And then Data, who is the total opposite because Spock resented being half human, right? Data is Pinocchio. He wants to be the real boy. So he's striving towards this paragon of humanity that TNG, I think, portrays the best of any of Star Trek ever, just this holy grail of what humanity can become. And of course, the mirror character in that show just wants desperately to be it. So that is a perfect fit. The Doctor in 7, definitely a little bit more nuanced, but my favorite thing with Spock, and why I'd probably argue he's probably the best in the entirety, is that he grows and changes as a character. I think it's worthy of books. Like, he starts off really not liking being human. He sort of starts to acknowledge some of the things that are human. Then he goes through almost going through the Kolinar and purging all emotions. He wants nothing to do with it. Then he comes back and dies, comes back, completes his whole evolution with my favorite line in all of Star Trek, which is, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. Like, he has a giant arc when it comes to this, like a 40-year arc that is gorgeous. And to me, that makes him stand out above the rest in terms of its efficacy as that mirror. So, I mean, that's me. That's what I would stick with.
Tillin says that too.
I love Tillin.
So the criteria being that Spock is the most effective use of that type of character, not so much he's the most outsider of all those outsider characters. Is that the criteria you're going with?
Well, under that criteria, I would choose Spock. If it's the other, I would say that probably the Doctor or Odo, being literally like nothing like us, is the farthest removed.
When you picked it, what were you thinking, Dave? What's the criteria of those two things? One of those two?
Because it says best example, and that's a that's
a bit vague, I guess.
Yeah, and the thing, part of what I was thinking about Odo is that Odo has just a fundamental morphic difference from every other thing we've met. Even the Horta, which isn't bipedal in its body plan, doesn't have the capacity to become anything other than a kind of weird pizza glob, right? Even though they're nifty pizza globs, like that's what it is. And Odo's very sensitive. There's that wonderful episode where we meet another one of the 100 that were sent out, and he's like starts out flying through space as a space animal and just runs into the ship. Is like, oh hey dudes, what's happening? I'll come aboard. Sounds fine. Or some, that's not the exact dialogue.
It's J.G. Hertzler, isn't it?
Oh, I forget.
Who plays
J.G. Hertzler?
Who plays the other changeling? I think so.
Yeah, he plays Laws. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
He's credited as Garmin Hertzler in the credits for that episode.
Is he
wow.
Really? Wow.
That's what the G stands
for.
In the J.
That's awesome.
But he's so good at it. He was was such a good character, portrayed so well.
Oh, but right. The differences between them are, one of them really embraces the fact of his alienness and feels above and superior to all these things. But Odo himself tries to understand himself through the very fact of his loneliness and alienness, and his connection with Kira ultimately lets him find out who he is as a person even more deeply than who he is as a form. Those one of those final scenes with them where he turns into a vapor and just kind of surrounds her is completely marvelous that way, right? Because he's able to show her and be who he is with her in ways that, not even she up until that point has been capable of really grokking, right? So in that sense, as an outsider character, I love Odo because he's so deeply alien. But there, I think I'm tending toward that first meaning where it's, who's the most outside. But I love your argument for Spock in that he has, the outside sort of tucked up into him, and he has to struggle with where it's lodged, as opposed to where he literally is going to fit inside things.
Right.
The other question too is when we talk about outsider, are we talking about, like you say with Odo, he's like so alien? Is that what we mean about outsider? Whereas it's just like a different form of life or of living. And that's what makes someone outsider. Or I might make the case for the Doctor. The Doctor, you could still argue, is just software and isn't life at all, potentially. So does that make somebody more outsider than just being kind of a different alien race and being kind of different biologically? But
I think the question that would come up there is, what does the Doctor show us about, what does the Doctor act as a mirror like, right? In terms of going back to Maeric's second definition, how does he act as a mirror that way? Because he very much is a kind of polished, blank surface, a snarky surface.
Very snarky.
At the start of the series.
Yeah, the Doctor is a great character because he starts off as a human copy. He's a copy of a human that is not very he's not a very polished human. He's not a very good, well-rounded human being. And so he even as just like, I'm working for my programming, his programming, which is just a copy at first, is a very poor copy of a very poor representative of humanity. And so we get to watch the evolution of the persona that he had, and also the evolution of his self-awareness, right? He has to be talked into having wants. He has to even be, before he even argues that he doesn't have all of his rights, he has to be talked into wanting them. He has to be talked into saying, like, and that's Kes. We don't often give Kes enough credit, but that was Kes. So she was like, you're a good person. You've helped me a lot. I consider you a friend. Would you like to be on, or do you have the ability to turn yourself off? Like, this all starts.
I do love it that, like, his first request is actually, would you just turn me off?
Yes, just turn me off when you leave, because I just sit around wandering around having nothing to do. And later he's mad because he's turned off because he has so much to do. This is like the actual evolution of that character. But I do love what you said with Odo, because, and I love that you brought up the Laws episode, because just as you said a moment ago, at that point, you said that Laws is the kind of character who sees himself so far above solids, monoforms in general, and Odo's the one who's like way more sort of attached with his his people and his way of being. But it's actually that episode that creates that dynamic at all. Leading up to that episode, Odo is very distant. He's like, you humanoids, this and that, and all this other stuff, right? And it wasn't until Laws comes and says, oh, they're not your friends. You're way better than them. It's that moment that causes him to become protective and defensive of his friends, where he's like, no, they're like me and we share things in common. Like he has that sort of epiphany in the need to defend his colleagues. And that's why I think that episode is so important for the evolution of him. He almost goes, remember, he almost leaves with Laws. It's so close. And so the answer to transformative experience through that episode. So good.
So the answer to this question, well, here, I'll just
they're all good. They're all
it really is like depends on how you look at it.
It does, wholly and completely.
There we go.
Laws helps Odo become one of the best characters removed from.
I'm sort of being serious though, for not like we didn't say best main character. We're just saying in Star Trek is Laws the best outsider character in Star Trek.
Well, if we're gonna open it up,
he's more of an outsider than Odo.
Entity.
What would you say?
Oh,
Dave?
Okay, okay. We're getting crazy.
The crystalline entity. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I don't know. It just speaks in rhythm and tones, Dave. We could talk to the crystalline entity.
Bag of mostly water.
Ugly bag of mostly water.
The home soil.
Actually, that's a pretty good example.
We should use on people more often. Ugly bag of mostly water.
I use it all the time, and I told Azure a couple podcasts ago. I said I'm going to call someone an ugly bag of mostly water in this podcast, and I did. It came up. But I would say that the ugly bags of mostly water episode, those granules of sand or whatever, have more in common with the shapeshifters than they do with us, because there's a very interesting sort of conglomerative amalgamation of consciousness that happens with the changelings that I feel like really sets them apart in this great way. Remember, like if we're talking about reflecting on humanity and the differences, Spock will go, you're like, oh, your human emotions. That's one of your human emotions. I don't do those. That's the removal. Data goes, I don't have emotions and I don't understand social norms. I just am like this robot. But then you get to Odo and he's like, I don't even understand the need for eating, drinking, or coupling, which is like he doesn't. He's a blank slate compared to us. He has almost no frame of reference. If he wasn't found by Dr. Mora and experimented on that whole time, he wouldn't have had that frame to even know, to be a solid. I mean, it's so far removed.
Odo doesn't understand coupling. It's like, hey Odo, what if it was 40,000 couples all at once? Like, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
Quark goes, you've never.
All right, well, how do we answer this one then? Jeez, we kind of went so many ways with it.
You have to torture me
Maeric
with 4 lights to tell me that I have to pick the best one. It's so hard. It's a tough one.
It's honestly, I think one of the answers I could give is that you would not have Odo without Spock or Data, clearly in chronological or like narratological terms. But
that's true.
Because I mean, you laid it out really beautifully there a minute ago, Maeric. Right? Spock argues one moment, then we take another step removed from that. We get Data. Remove a couple more premises, you get Odo. Right? Remove a couple more premises than that. I don't know if we've seen that character quite yet.
And would we be able to relate to it at all? I mean, it gets harder and harder for us as the viewers to be able to do that the farther you remove it from us.
Precisely.
I don't think it's Spock. And it's like you did mention, Maeric, that he's just like, those are your human emotions. I don't do those. But I'm currently reading the Metaphysics of Star Trek in preparation for our talk with the writer Richard Hanley on metaphysics through the lens of Star Trek.
Nice plug.
Yeah, indeed.
Flawless.
That Vulcans just don't experience, though suppress is probably a better word, lower emotions, but they certainly do higher ones. Like higher emotions such as friendship, and Spock certainly would admit to feeling those things. So they'll readily admit to higher emotions. They don't call them those,
depending on
but
when
that's what they are.
That's what I like so much about it. He's such an evolutionary character.
True.
Like Strange New World Spock has been this wonderful young, naive, experimental Spock. Like you can see, he feels like he's young and experimenting with this, and he's, they've made that first episode in the cage where him laughing and all that. They've made that canon. This 10-year period of time where he's sort of experimenting with emotions.
Yeah, I was
without the resentment
experimenting with
towards it.
laughters for a while. What a funny way to. Yeah,
I think
that's
one of
one
my
of the funniest
favorite scenes-
retcons they've done yet.
One of my favorite scenes with him is the moment where they're just sitting in the bar area, and I think it's Chapel and the doctor watching him, and all of a sudden he just stands up and says, "I'm sorry, you had to see
witness that
and
outburst.
literally nothing's happened." Right?
Yes, he's having that discussion with the other Vulcan, and somebody Mbenga says like, you can tell they really don't like each other, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "Totally, it's fine." And he walks over. "I'm sorry, you had to witness
Sorry, you
that."
had to witness
I apologize of all my father's ex-colleagues. He brings out the worst.
Yeah,
And really,
exactly.
maybe he just stood up slightly abrupt, but not really for a human.
Right?
He just like stood up sort of fast, maybe. And like to him, that was just like
Screw
flipping
you,
the
buddy.
table. Yeah, it's just
Really,
like,
it makes a point about Vulcan culture that like there is a certain tightly wound quality in Vulcan culture that humans cannot grok the stress of. Right? Like it's only by
and Benga
subjecting
could see it
themselves
though.
to that
He could
kind
see
of
it.
stress that like they can somehow contain those violent volcanic emotions, right? But you're right,
Volcanic,
Mbenga
I like
can
that.
sort of see it, but
It's almost like a double entendre. It's
Yes.
volcanic.
All right, well let's bring this one to an end.
This was a great
well
discussion. by
probed,
the
but
way.
I don't know if it can be conclusive.
I'm gonna say it's Odo. I think I've been convinced. Because at least in the way that even compared to Spock, and certainly to Data, he doesn't want to be accepted. He wants to be that outsider.
Mhm.
And even the Doctor wants to be accepted too. He wants to be beloved and worshipped for his
Celebrated.
opera genius.
Indeed.
Exactly, and his medical genius.
I
You know,
adore
I've
that
cured 45 diseases since we've been in the Delta Quadrant. Does anyone care?
Does anyone care? I love that character, and I love Robert Picardo so much. He's just such an
he's
awesome
great.
guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm convinced. Odo. What about you guys?
It depends entirely upon the lens through which we are viewing this argument, and I think we've explored 8 different lenses through it that all had great answers and avenues to go down. So it's really hard to pick. I think it would depend entirely. So if it is the farthest removed and the greatest distance through which we can see through that lens, the greatest and broadest view of humanity and sentience at all, right? I would say that's Odo. For the ability to reflect on humanity in that particular role in the narrative way that Dave was talking about a moment ago, spanning 60 years, almost now 57 years. I think Spock is the most significant and has made the greatest impact. So I'm going to leave it with that duality.
All right. Well,
If
my
with your
final story, go ahead.
I'll just complete the duality things and then hand it to you. If I'm going to do that as well, I'm going to pick Data for the criteria that you pick Spock for, and that is
Nice to see
because
some Data
again,
love.
the journey and the exploration. He starts off, trying to whistle, and he basically just a robot from a '60s movie,
Pop
or a
goes the
'50s
weasel.
sci-fi movie. Yeah. And by the end, as you reminded us in Picard,
he does come full circle.
Now,
That's
he's a
true.
biological life form.
Mm-hmm.
He does that journey, But so yeah.
And I'll tell you, in the end of that journey, my heart swelled and I rolled my eyes in about 50-50. Like the fact they made him after they killed him in the beginning of Picard, and they killed him at the end of Next Generation movies, and then they brought him back, and now he's actually a human. I mean, it's everything I ever wanted, but the critic in me couldn't help a little eye roll. So
I was actually okay with all that. I just didn't like Picard becoming a synth. That seemed unnecessary and silly.
Which again served almost no purpose at all.
No
by
purpose.
the way,
The
no
nerf
purpose.
at the beginning of season 2, like, it'll basically mean nothing.
Yeah, no.
Season 3, they just
season
kind
1
of
and
wash
season 2.
over that a little. They don't talk
They
about
washed
season
over a
1 or
lot of
2,
things in
like,
that show.
at all. It was like, yeah.
So,
all right.
for my final thoughts, I will turn to a book by the medieval Muslim scholar Ibn Rushd.
I love
called
this
The
guy.
Incoherence of the Incoherence.
Mm-hmm.
And point to the fact that I think that the trouble with outsider characters is that Star Trek needs a multiplicity of them, because each one of them allows an interrogation of a certain kind of difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, I think my answer to this is that Odo certainly is the most far out outsider, I think. But ultimately, it comes down to basically a kind of Chirk-induced problem, right? Like, it's all in how you look at things. And for TOS, Spock, I think, is
They
the
are
most
delicious.
appropriate outsider. And we just move along, right? Like, what each one expresses, I think, is excellent for each series they're in.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's my.
Before we wrap this up, can I ask a question? Because I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. Who do
Sam
you
beat
think
you to it.
represents this mirror in Enterprise? Who do you think best represents that narrative role, that plot device?
Phlox.
Phlox?
Oh, I don't know. I think
Certainly
like,
in the list. Yeah.
yeah, Hoshi,
But
I think,
joyously.
is a good one for that too.
Oh, he's the best character in that show.
Oh, I love
I
Phlox.
adore Phlox.
He's my favorite Doctor character, probably.
But for me,
And
like,
there's so many
Hoshi
good ones.
not wanting to be part of Starfleet gives us an interesting outsider character, because the whole thing is about the history of Starfleet.
That's fascinating. She was almost conscripted.
Yeah. Like, he really twists her arm to get her onto that starship, because like,
and then she spent 2 seasons regretting it. that was a great.
Or perhaps
revelation.
Pavel
Oh, the
Chekhov,
sail
because
episode, yeah.
as you know, Starfleet was invented in Russia, but nobody remembers that, so that makes him a bit of an outsider.
Don't you know everything was invented in Russia?
All good things, right?
All good things.
You're gonna have to tune in for another Class L probe, Sam, to get the answer to this one.
That's right. It's a good question, Sam.
That did come up in debate 9, so that can come back around on it.
Well, I mean, I think at this rate there may be just one thing left to say.
No, hold on.
Are we got to do all our things first? I forgot.
All the things.
Find us on Facebook, YouTube,
things.
Twitch, wherever you get your podcasts. Contact us at locutorsoftrek@gmail.com. You can find our audio-only version wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, you can find us at ufpodcast.com. And, you know, we are a federation, a mighty federation, where we do many things Star Trek related. We got Treckle Trunks, Troubles with Trivias. We got probes, of course. Geek Tall challenges, even. We've got, you know, a mighty federation. Reviews, you know, we're reviewing Lower Decks right now. Check it out. And First Contact interviews. Many more to come. We just did one with Derek Tyler Attico recently.
A great conversation.
Awesome guy. Yep. And, of course, we have X-Rated, the X-Men animated review show. We're getting to the end, but we got lots of fun stuff on the horizon for you all as well. So stay tuned there. Graphic Histories. Lots of interviews to come, too. I think he's going to review interview Cousin Dave for his next episode.
Ooh.
And that'll be interesting. Hold Up a Movie podcast. Check that out with me and Murphy. Season 2 starting soon with, again, Cousin Dave joining us for space movies. Speaking of Cousin Dave, Super Mater Brothers. Him and my cousin Jeff and Jaemeel. They review reality shows over there. And son of Dave Mater, Eamon Mater. As Eamon on Track, where I'll be going on there too pretty soon to talk about SMV Thunder Dave. I'm going to take him some bass jazz. Yeah. Get a little Wooten, get a little Marcus Miller, Stanley Clark into him. You know, he's a bass player, so he'll be all the better for it.
All right.
And Hellbound Podcast with Alex Blacksburn and Michael Chan. And, of course, Trivial Debates. I'm hosting 2 versions of Trivial Debates in October, 2 horror-themed ones. We got a bunch of cool guests. First one, we have Chelsea Harris, who... I forgot her company name, but she makes cool horror dolls. They're awesome. And we have Jessica Chan, who many people on this channel will know, and Mortis Media from that YouTube channel, if you're familiar with that. They will be the competitors. I shall be the host, so look forward to that. And that's all of our federation, but there's also, we got Maeric and the night shift. What are you guys saying?
What are we saying? Well,
Yeah.
I am Captain Maeric of the Night Shift. We do podcast watch parties. We're a Discord community. You can come check us out. We're on Instagram, Twitter, all of that good stuff. I do sort of like long form podcast deep dive discussions, very akin to this. If you like this kind of thing, this is my cup of tea for sure. My cup of Earl Grey hot. And I do like YouTube graphics for it to make it fun and choppy. It's a lot of fun. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you gentlemen today. This was so great.
Well,
Thanks
it's
for
been
having me.
lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You too.
Indeed.
Now, only one thing left to say.
In transmission.
End transmission.
Thanks, guys.